Hi everyone, it's Ajanette, and I am coming back to finish up your lecture on sensation and perception. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about perception today. So perception is our mental understanding, our cognitive understanding of the sensory information. It involves selecting, organizing, and interpreting those sensations and creating kind of a comprehensive and coherent cognitive understanding of that information. And sometimes illusions can cause a disparity between what we're actually sensing and what we're perceiving. So sometimes we, like looking at something as this, it looks like this line might be longer than this line, but if you actually take a measuring tape, the two are exactly the same because we have these lines coming in at a converging point, then it makes this line look bigger than what it really is. Additionally, the moon might look particularly huge on some particular days, and it's really about lighting and clarity in the sky that make it look bigger than it is. We know based on size constancy, it's always the same. When we talk about perception, just like with sensation, there needs to be the sensory data picked up by the receptors, a transduction process, and then it needs to be sent to our brain through those neural impulses. Perception is the same way. First, it involves selection, where it's going to pull out key sensory information. It's going to organize that information in terms of form, constancy, depth, color, and then it's going to interpret that information. It has to adjust to some adaptation, perceptual set, and frame of reference issues, and then it's going to conduct either a bottom-up or a top-down process. So with selection, it involves selective attention where we're going to filter out unimportant information and focus only on the information that's critical. That phenomenon can be experienced through the cocktail party effect when you're chatting with a group of people and your attention is focused on that immediate group, but then across the room you hear your name mentioned. All of a sudden, you can block out what's happening in the current group and totally focus in on the conversation happening across the room that mentioned your name. So selective attention involves kind of filtering out and honing in on. Additionally, there are certain features that we are going to be more prone to processing. So we have receptors that are specific or that are primed specifically for certain data, like we have receptors in our brain to pick up facial recognition, and that's a really important part of our survival. Prosopagnosia is in fact the inability to recognize faces. Sometimes people can't even recognize their own faces, or they can't recognize the faces of their children. Tara Fall is one such individual. She's actually come out and spoke at MSJC for our psychology club. Additionally, you have kittens that are raised in environments in which they don't see horizontal lines, and it really skews their perception and their ability to function in an adaptive way in that environment. Habituation is essentially, if you focus on kind of the root word of habit, it's essentially when something becomes a habit to us or we become mentally bored of it, our brain tunes it out so that we can focus in on more relevant information that might be a little bit more threatening to us. And we do find that our brain will ignore certain information after time. Tying a string around your finger is great initially, but after a while your brain will habituate to it and it will no longer remember it. So it's really important when you set yourself up for those little reminders that you are acting upon those little reminders within a reasonable time frame. And then perceptual organization, number one, starts with form, and Gestalt principles really help us to understand how we create the concept of form mentally. And Gestalt principles are based on the concept that the whole is worth more than the sum of its parts. So we see patterns in sensory data and we create a perception based upon that data. One principle is figure ground, where what do you see in this image? A lot of people see this yellow kind of like a cup-looking thing, medieval maybe, but some of you might see the green faces. And so that, depending upon what you're seeing as the figure and what you're seeing as the background. If you're seeing the green as the background, the figure then becomes this kind of medieval cup thing. If you're seeing the yellow as the background, then the faces become the figure. So we do this, we utilize this concept regularly when we're talking about even just reading our textbook, because we see the white as the background and the black lettering as the figure that we're focusing in on. Figures are another key information, particularly reversible figures are another key component of looking at kind of these illusions that can be created. So in this, you see reversible figures that can show multiple images all in one. And again, it depends on the figure ground component. And that, what do you see? A lot of people see like a little skull type thing where you have eyeballs and a nose. Some of you, if you look closely, you might see a lady looking in the mirror. Here's her reflection looking back at her. This is the back of her and the front of her. And she's sitting at a vanity table, and this is the giant mirror. And then impossible figures where, you know, you climb up but climb down, and you have basically things leading you to nowhere, and you know, this isn't taking you to another floor. It's all just creating an illusion, and that can be challenging as well. But they do help us understand perceptual principles. Beyond form, our brain also needs to organize information. It organizes it based on proximity. When things are closer together, we see grouped things as you know, being related together. So we kind of look at 2 groups here rather than 6 separate images, 3 groups rather than 6 separate images, and 3 groups again rather than 6 separate images. We also see the continuity, so we tend to follow lines. We don't see it as each individual separate line. We see the continuity of this line going together, of this line maybe going together, right? We don't see these individual chunks. Additionally, what do you see here? A triangle, a square, a circle. Really and truly you don't. You're seeing 3 separate angles, 4 separate angles, and 4 separate arcs. But our brain automatically fills in the gaps and closes that image. So we see a triangle, a square, and a circle. Additionally, we see things that are similar. So not only do we group based on proximity, we group based on similarity. So here you likely see the 5 because all the dark green dots are similar to one another. So here's the law of similarity in real world, where we see rows of cookies based on similarity, all the pumpkin together, all the Santa together, all the Jewish stars together. We also see a full clock here. I'm going to move this. And that's the law of closure. Even though we really don't see the full circle, we do in our minds understand it to be a circle. Here we see the law of continuity or continuation, where we see freeways. Could you imagine if we only saw it in bits and pieces as we're driving on the road? Instead, we see it as one sequential continuous freeway. And the law of proximity, we might see 3 separate families here, but in reality they could all be together. They could be all individuals, but based on proximity and how close they are to one another, we assume it's 2 separate families. Additionally, certain things may remain constant even though there's some visual changes or some sensory changes. Size constancy, when somebody's walking up to you, the hand is the same size no matter what, right? Even if it's getting closer. Shape constancy, I turn, and even though you're seeing some perspectives of it, we recognize the hand is one continuous object and it has a constant shape, even though your viewer perspective of it might change. And color constancy, whether I turn on the light or off the light, you still perceive the same colors. You perceive me as still wearing a black jacket, whether the light's on or off. And then brightness constancy, based on the shading, the hues can change, but we still recognize the puppy's brightness is the same, regardless of whether or not the lighting on him changes. Depth perception is another way in which we organize information. We can read binocular cues, which draw upon information and data from both eyes, or monocular cues, which only rely on data from one and processing from one eye at a time. Binocular cues that we use are retinal disparity, where if you put your finger here, your eyes kind of merge together. And so your eyes, when they converge together, they kind of send sensory information to our brain to process and perceive that information accurately based on that retinal disparity and how it might be portrayed on one image as opposed to another. That allows our brain to determine how far or close an image is. And so additionally, our brain is using two eyes to create that stereoscopic vision where we see one image even though it's kind of merging and consolidating or fusing two separate images into one understanding. Again, that convergence as your eyes, you bring your finger forward. Monocular cues include accommodation, where the lens is going to be adjusted based on the muscles, and as those muscles are trying to constrict or lengthen out the lens, then it's going to send neural impulses to our brain to help us understand whether something's close or far away. And then additionally, motion parallax, depending upon how fast something is moving by you. We see that the speed changes based on the distance. Things further away appear to be going by very slow, whereas things close up go by fast, especially when we're driving in a car, riding a train, something of that nature. Other monocular cues that we use include linear perspective. We see that lines kind of converge off into the distance, and we use interposition, where we look at this is obscuring the object behind it, so we assume this object is closer and this object is further away. Relative size becomes a really important comparison for depth. We see that the mouse compared to the elephant, we might see that smaller objects are further away and larger objects are closer. Texture gradient, depending upon the clarity of the textures, we usually see clearer textures. You can see the individual grains and strands for things that are closer up, and then further away it becomes much more blurred. Additionally, we have relative height, where people off in the distance are going to appear to be shorter than people closer up. And we have light and shadow, where we can see something as kind of popping out or indented depending upon the shadowing. And then aerial perspective, we see that this is based on going through the atmosphere like in an airplane. We see that things have different clarity based upon how close or far away they are. Another way that we organize information beyond depth perception is through our perception of color. And color perception is really interesting because we have so many different hues of colors that we're trying to discriminate against or see. Trichromats will process all colors using three kind of basic colors, red, green, and blue. Dichromats can only see those two colors, and so they have a limited color vision. And monochromats only see in black and white. And so although we talk about color blindness because we are seeing black and white, it's really more like a color confusion than it is blindness, where we have a hard time differentiating between colors. So here a lot of you are seeing the threes. If you're not seeing the three, you may be a dichromat and not a trichromat. So that could be problematic for you. So trichromat suggests the theory